Hello there. So it turns out that YouTube, in their infinite wisdom, keep changing the stream key. So that's the security key or whatever it is that allows you to stream data directly to YouTube, obviously, which is how it works, but they keep changing it, or they periodically change it. So you have to keep checking and then copy pasting the new stream key that's generated into whatever program you are using to stream your streams to YouTube. And that's why it'll stream, but nothing will happen on YouTube's end, because the keys don't match. So the data goes somewhere, no idea where the data goes, but it goes somewhere because it's been sent out. But updated the stream key and we are now streaming live to YouTube. Ho hum. Right, so yesterday, just summarize a little bit because there was so much stuff to go over because of UV maps. That is the nature of UV maps. So basically, you've got two choices. You can either spend as little time as possible on it and just UV map your objects one-to-one, which basically mushes up your UV maps and the texture distribution on your meshes excuse me, on your objects. Or you can take a little bit of time and do it properly, inverted commas or air quotes, properly, so that you get more variety within your object, but you are still using the same basic core number of textures. So it's all about how you use your textures and how your UV maps are essentially related to that. So take your time and sort out your UV maps to try and get as much from your images that are being used as you possibly can, without just requiring people to squash their textures, which, all well and good, it's very easy to do. It means that you get a lot of derivations and lots of other iterations of your product, but at the same time, or the downside of that is that you limit the creativity that people can use on their versions of the product, because you limit some of the, well, you're basically limiting them to flat colors because anything else just distorts. So that's just a summary of the UV mapping stuff, and it, as we saw yesterday, it can be quite fiddly, quite extensive is not the right word, but it takes a lot of time. But today, so we've done all our UV maps, so let's go back into layout. So today what we're going to do is take a look at getting the room functional for IMVU. So that means using all the inner components that are needed for that. Where are all the furniture? Oh. Getting all the nodes and things into place, and then doing a test export to see how well the room comes into IMVU, or it is imported. So what we want to do first is we've saved the file. Just double check. Right, so let's just get stuck in with the room skeleton. So that's what these components are. So I'm going to unhide room nodes, which are the root elements of a room. let's just hide our room mesh for now. So I think we went over these on the first stream, but the core components of a room are the root node, which is called skeleton.room. There's a node.room to which lights are linked. So we have an omni in this, that's an omnidirectional lamp. And then we have the camera nodes, and that is essentially what we look through when we are viewing the scene. Or that's where we initially start, at least, anyway. Hang on a second, let me just... Don't need any of those. Close those. Oh, that's a reminder. So this is for the room starter files. If you just want to learn about learn about creating stuff generally, just go there. So I've dropped a couple of links. Right, so these elements form the core components of the room itself. Next to those, so unhide those and unhide those. So next we have the furniture nodes, and these are the things that everything is attached to or snaps to in IMVU. So when you drop a furniture item into a room, it snaps to one of these points. And there are three types. There's floor nodes, wall nodes, and then ceiling nodes. And they're all basically the same thing, except that they point, they point in different directions. So ceiling nodes point downwards into the room. Wall nodes point inwards. And floor nodes point upwards. And that's the essentially that's the only thing that really distinguishes the nodes from one another, aside from the names. So you could use a furniture node on the ceiling and just turn it upside down, and it would essentially be a ceiling node, although it's still a floor node. And vice versa with any of them. In Blender at least, the important orientation indicator is the blue handle of the widget. So that's the Z or Z axis. And that, well, it's in for walls, down for ceiling, up for floors. There, as far as I'm aware, there isn't necessarily a minimum requirement, but you want to stick to a maximum of no more than 600. A lot of rooms do have more than that, but you run the risk of using up a lot of resources if you have too many of these in place. So what you want to be doing really when you're using these is, if you want to stick within the limitations, use them strategically. So areas of interest, you want to have more nodes in those places than you do in other areas. So if you had a big nature scene and you had a lake, you would have more nodes collected around the lake than you would out in the open fields. And these eventually connect to the skeleton. Not skeleton, they connect to the root node, which is skeleton.room. That's the furniture nodes. And then next we have the seat nodes. Now in this particular case, the seat nodes come with a set of dummies, standing and sitting. And they help us, well, they do two things. Aside from providing the seat nodes that are needed for the room to function, so people can appear in it, they also provide us a sense of scale and position of the things that we make. So the scale of a room and things within it. And we have, each one has 4 nodes. We've got the main seat node. This is where the avatar is located when it's actually using a seat, well, it's an avatar spot, shall we say. So when an avatar spot is being used, this big node, in Blender at least, is where the avatar actually stands or sits. It's routed to that node. We then have the handle. Let's just see if we can hide that for now. We then have the handle, which is what the user clicks on to use that particular pose spot. So those are the little symbols that we see. Depending on whether you're using a desktop client or any of the others, it'll be that round spot or that round arrowy thing. And then we have the capture and picture nodes. And those are the interactive nodes where the avatars stand when they are interacting with one another. So when they're shaking hands, etc., or doing other interactive action. And they are a fixed distance from one another. And that's mainly just so that when the avatars are shaking hands, the two hands touch. So if they are not the same distance, if they are not the same, if they are not the appropriate fixed distance apart, all that happens is that the avatars just don't match up mesh to mesh. By default, a room needs 6 of these, which is why there are 6 shown or included with the starter file. Because if they're not included, IMVU will automatically place them into the room, and it does it in a way that may not be conducive to the room itself. Because what it'll do, generally speaking, is just drop them around the root node of the room. So they'll literally appear in a straight line relative to the root node. So I've not seen anyone have avatars appearing outside of a small room, but in a small room, if you don't put them in, chances are that you might have avatars standing outside the room. And then of course we have, so hide that, and of course we have our mesh. Whoops, that's the old room mesh, we don't need that. Couple of things that we can probably get rid of and just outright delete at some point. What's that? Oh, it's the inside window frames. So yes, of course, and then there is the room. So what we're going to do with this is, to make this a functional room in IMVU, what we're going to do is join all of these meshes together so that we end up with a single mesh with multiple textures. We can do this at any point, but we have to do that to export it for IMVU. Otherwise, we'll end up with, how many meshes are there? So we've got tells us down in the status bar down here. So we've got 12 objects. So if we exported this, once it's set up, if we exported this, we'd end up with 12 meshes imported into the project, which is unnecessary. I want to try and avoid that. So what we can do then is set up our nodes. So we can leave the furniture skeleton.room, node.room. We can leave those two where they are. For the Omni, so this is the lamp, what we can do is move that to the front, the open garage door. And what that will do is in IMVU, it'll create a sense of direction for most of the light that illuminates the room. We can also grab the camera. So this back node called target is what we are always looking at. So we're always looking at that object. Camera root, that is the camera entity itself, and it represents the camera entity, so that is looking at that. So we can grab those two, shift click, and we can just, whoops. So it's doing that because we are manipulating the objects based on their local orientation. And because these two are facing each other, their left and right is different. So undo that, go into global, transform. Now we can move those into the open doorway. And we'll come back to these in a little bit because we want to adjust those relative to the height of the avatar. What we'll do is change their height so that the camera is looking directly at the first seat node or the first pose avatar spot that's in the room when the room loads. And that avoids the whole camera shifting around when you click the screen in IMVU, the camera will sometimes jump, and it'll jump wildly because it's not set up to be looking at the avatar, the first seat node of a room. So we've just done that basic stuff. They're already connected to the bits that they need to be connected to. So camera is connected to skeleton. If they're not connected, just select them, select skeleton.room last, and then from the, oh well, it doesn't work with parent. Object. Oh, it does work, that's right. Select object, keep transform. These are parented, so let's just unparent those. Keep transform. I'll hide the room from now. So the lamp, whenever something is connected to something parent-wise, so there's a parent-child relationship, we get this little dotted line appearing and it indicates the relationship between the objects. The camera, even though this is the target, the cameras are not connected like this. So the root, the camera itself is not targeted at the target, and the target then parented to skeleton. Both nodes, in this particular case, are connected directly to skeleton.room. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. That's just the way that it works out within Blender and FBX. So to connect them, select the objects that are to be the child of the parent, and then select the parent last. So this is what everything is being linked to or connected to. So in Blender it'll highlight a brighter orange. Then from the object menu, parent, object, and that'll bring the little pop-up up. And we want object and then keep transform, keep that selected, because otherwise it'll reset the objects to funny positions. We might see this in effect later when we start adding the seat nodes. And it's the same with the lamp, but that is connected to, so let's clear that, whoops, parent, keep transform. And let's clear those two as well. So you might see that the relationship between the objects changes in the outliner stack. So if we keep an eye on the objects themselves and what's going on in the outliner, we'll see that the indentation changes depending on the relationship the objects have with one another. So I'm going to select the light, shift click node.room, that's the parent of all the lights. We're going to parent that, parent, object, and again object, keep transform. And what that's done in the outliner, it's now shifted the omni light so it's underneath room.node, and we can do the same thing with room.node, select that and then skeleton.room, and if we watch the relationship, object, object, keep transform, and we can see now that room node.room is now underneath skeleton.room. So they're all linked together, and we can confirm that again because of these dotted lines. So that's the room basics. So what we want to do with the furniture node furniture nodes, let's unhide the room. I'm going to delete these because it's a little annoying that they keep popping back up. So delete, select, delete. Just double check. Yeah, we don't want that one. Delete. We don't want these frames that we got rid of, so delete those. And there was another one. Delete and delete. There it is, delete that. So I'm just going to save this. File, save as. 8. So let's hide skeleton nodes and activate furniture nodes. So there is a grid by default, or IMVU uses a grid by default, and that's just a convenience thing. Nodes don't have to be locked to a grid. They can be placed anywhere. So when you are placing your nodes, depending on what the node is, you can actually place them anywhere, within the room. But it is a good idea to place them in a way that it does make some sense. So with these floor nodes, we can place them, so we're holding control down to snap to the grid. We can place them towards the sides of the room and leave the ones at the center, we can leave those where they are. For the walls, we can select those and move them inwards so that they touch where the wall actually is. So that's aligned to the wall. So these three view top yeah, so those are aligned to the wall. These three where are the other ones? And these three view top. So holding control down snaps to the grid, so it just makes, and as because we made the room based on a grid, it snaps the nodes into place. But as for the floor nodes, let's move them so that they make a bit more sense. Move that to the door. Middle of the window. So what we've got, let's go into local, are our wall nodes now pointing in to the room. So they all point inwards, floor nodes all point upwards, and the ceiling nodes may not need as many of these. So let's go with so 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's the right height. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you may want to, depending on how much effort you want to put into this, because on a big room, when there are hundreds and hundreds of these, furniture is dropped into the room based on the numerical order of the nodes. As well as the proximity to the avatar. So let's get those more or less centered on each of the ceiling panels. and we can get rid of these extra ones. We don't need those. Generally speaking, you don't need as many ceiling nodes as you do any of the other nodes, because they're not used as much. So we can get rid of those three. Delete. So those are our furniture nodes in place. So if you wanted to create more furniture nodes, just select the ones that are provided and then duplicate them. Object, duplicate objects. That'll duplicate them, and it'll also rename them numerically in a way that means that you won't necessarily have to rename them manually. It'll do it automatically. And just repeat that process for however many extra nodes are needed. And it's the same for, let's just delete all of those. It's the same for walls. So depending on how many walls you needed, select, duplicate, and again it automatically renames in a way that can be used in IMVU. And the one thing that you want to watch out for, particularly with the wall nodes, is that although they work based on the orientation of the z-axis pointing inwards, they can be rotated. So if there were a, let's go into top view. So if the room, whoops, dagnammit. Keep pressing the wrong button. So if the room had a curved corner and you wanted a node here so that people could put, let's say, a corner light, you can position the node in the corner and you can rotate it so that it, let's say 45 degrees for the sake of argument, you can rotate it so the z-axis points inwards. But that can be a bit hit and miss as to whether that works. So be aware of that, that they can be rotated, but doing so may be risky in the sense that it may break that particular node, even though in principle it should work. So that's all our furniture nodes. And what we need to do with these now, let's hide the room. We need to select all of these, so just click drag and we get our selection box. Unhide our skeleton, and what we want to do with these is select skeleton.room and then parent all of these to that. So parent object, and it does that, and of course we've got our object keep transform. So again we've got all these relationship lines appearing. That confirms that they're all linked together. So what we should find now is that if we select the room node, skeleton node on its own, and move that, it moves everything. And we've also got a proxy, a representation of the nodes that can be selected underneath room at skeleton.room. So that's showing us the hierarchy of the skeleton that's being developed. Because we're not using an armature object like the avatar, what we're doing is creating an armature-like structure, a skeletal structure based on the relationship of each of these components relative to skeleton.room. So next, what we could do is add our seating. So we're going to hide that, hide all of that, hide the furniture nodes, we don't need those for the moment. And where's our room gone? Unhide the room. Right, so position time, so we can grab these. So click the large node when manipulating the avatar seat node sets, because that means that we can just, everything's grouped to that node, so we can just grab it and move it. So I just move that in front of the door. Let's rotate this a little. Plonk that one there. And then with the seated ones, what we can do is use the blocks that we had. These are the junk that we keep in the garage. Because what we can do with these, let's move this over here. What we can do with these is use them for our seating. So we grab, select the seat node, grab that, drag it back. Let's switch to the universal, so we don't have to keep toggling between them. And then move this one here. So as with seating in particular, make sure that you allow for the avatar, one of the poses that the avatar strikes kicks the legs back. So instead of being here, they're more like here. So make sure that you make allowance for the avatar's legs to be kicked back and not be subsumed by the furniture item that they're sitting on. So that's basically our seating. And as with the furniture nodes, same again. If you want to duplicate, select the nodes and dummy so that you have a reference as to where the seat nodes are, and just duplicate. Where's it gone? There it is, duplicate. And do that as many times as you need. And if the room doesn't include custom poses, which we may do in another stream, if the room does not include custom poses, that's all you need to do, is just duplicate these standard standing and sitting nodes. Right, so these need to be parented to skeleton.room. So let's hide all the meshes. Oh, it might be easier just to hide the room, hide the blocks, then select the dummy meshes, press the H key or object, where is it? Or is it, sorry, where is it? Oh, there it is, right at the bottom. Show hide. Duh. Show hide, hide selected. So that reveals all the nodes. And what we want to do with seating, this is actually before we parent them all together. What we need to make sure is seating is numerically right, yes. So this is kind of important in order to get the seating to work properly. So regardless as to whether a seat is a standing or sitting spot, depending on how many there are, the seats, so the seat, the first bit has to be numerically continuous. So we've got 6, which is the minimum. So we have seat 01 through to 06. So what comes after that, the dot sitting or dot standing, is immaterial to this. And it's the same for custom seats. So if we had a custom seat here, the custom seat would have a unique name dot custom, or whatever it would be, instead of dot sitting or dot standing. So a custom would be dot custom, whatever that name is or the phrase is. But the seat name is still numerically incremental. So seat 01 through to 20, let's say for the sake of argument. You'll need to make sure, I'm just thinking, you need to make sure that there are, I've not actually tried this actually. They need to be sequential in the sense that you can't have 2 seat nodes with the same number. So seat 01, you can't have 2 seat 01s dot sitting, and you can't have a seat 01 dot sitting and a seat 01 dot standing. So you can't have a combination of the appends. If the prefix is seat 01, you can only have one. But the minimum is 6. I've not actually tried this. So if you had 12, but you didn't have a sequential numbering, so if you had 12 seats, but you numbered them, let's say from 012 to 020 or 24, I'm not sure whether IMVU will read that as if there aren't 6 seat nodes in from 1 to 6 and then drop the default seat nodes in place. So always just make sure that your first node or first set starts with 01 through 06 as a minimum, as we've got here, and then 07 onwards. But these need to be connected to room skeleton. And for that, all we need to do is just select them. It doesn't matter what order those are selected. Select the room node or the skeleton.room, and then again parent, object, and we see the relationship lines. And this is why we need keep transform active, because for the seat nodes it will throw them all over the place. So object, then keep transform. So if you want to rename the nodes, just do this set object and again keep transform. If you want to rename the nodes, we can do all of that in the outliner up here. All you need to do is just double click and give it the appropriate name for the node type. So catcher 05 dot standing 06, 07, whatever it is. Oh, and what we can do as well is we want to try and avoid, let's get the room back up with the blocks. We want to avoid this happening. So we've got two nodes that are interrupting each other. So what we can do with these, make sure we're in global, select them and just move them out to one side. And as long as they are moved as a pair, that won't cause any issues. The other ones are okay. So let's continue parenting. Hide the room. So select object, parent, object, and again keep transform. Whoops. Whoops. What did we just do? Oh, it's the cursor. Double check. So click the root node, press the G key, and everything moves with it. So we're almost ready to try exporting. So that's the room, skeleton. So we've got our seating, so we can see that it's organized numerically. So each set has each set corresponds to a particular seat node. So seat 01 has catcher 01, pitcher 01, and handle 01, and so on down through the nodes. But when you duplicate these, that's one thing to note actually with the names. When you duplicate these, Blender will actually add and append. Let's just do that with these. Move those out of the way for the moment so we can see. But Blender adds a numerical append after the name. So you will have to then make sure that these are named correctly. So this would be handle 7, and it would drop into place. This would be catcher 7, and we'd have pitcher 7, so double click, and then seat 7. So double click, get rid of the append, and make sure that it removes the period or the full stop. And that's what you would do for your renaming. So you can duplicate the seat nodes and just rename them appropriately in the outliner. Let's get rid of those, we don't need that. So that is our basic room skeleton. So what we need to do now is prep the mesh. So we want to hide those blocks and room. And for this, all we need to do, let's just double check our textures. So depending on the mesh, we have different material assignments. But because more or less all the materials are being used within the room, all we need to do is just do a box select everything, shift click the floor in this particular instance, so one of these objects becomes active. Actually, let's do something before we do that. Just double check that we're going to include only the bits that we need, particularly around the windows and the doors. Yeah, that's okay. So box select the floor, shift click, that means it's the active object, and we can see that confirmed in the outliner. And then object join, so it joins them all together, and we get all our materials listed on this single object. Right, so mesh prep. Two main things because we've joined a couple of, well, three main things because we've joined a couple of meshes together. So edit mode, select all, mesh cleanup, merge by distance. So we'll have to increase the value because there's a scale difference between Blender and IMVU. And there we can see that it's removed 58 vertices. So that's okay. Exit edit mode, object mode, shade smooth, and that'll make it go all mushy. So that's smooth shading, and what we want is modifiers, add modifier, edge split, and based on the settings it'll essentially revert the room back to what it was. But just double check. So there's a little bit of oddness down here. So we can see that the shading differs in that section. It should be flat like this bit, but it's not. So that means there's probably an attachment somewhere in there that needs to be looked at. Edit mode. Well, we have to make an adjustment to our doorway. So using our materials, what we want to do is just hide the frame. So select, hide, so we can see what's going on down here. So it's attached to this. Right, so to fix that, select the face, mesh, split. Let's just double check our UV placement on that, because might have to do that on the other doors as well. Double check that's okay. That one's okay. But the shading, similarly gone a bit iffy on those. So select, mesh, split. So look around the room just to check. Everything else seems okay. Frames. So unhide, so that's Alt H, or it should be in mesh, show hide, reveal hidden. There are frames back in place. Exit edit mode. Oops. Then what we want to do, so we've joined all our meshes together, we've checked the texture assignments, material assignments, we've double checked the smoothing to make sure everything's working properly. Remove doubles so that the mesh is continuous. So the next thing to do is to edit mode again. It's been a while since we've done a room. Object data properties. It's already got a vertex group called skeleton.room, which we needed because we used part of the default room, the example room that comes in the starter file. So select everything, select all. We need to make sure that that group is associated with everything in our room. So select everything and then click the assign button, and that assigns everything to that group. So we can test that with deselect. And the final thing is then to parent the room object mode to skeleton.room. So we select the mesh, then the node, object, whoops, parent, object, keep transform again. So skeleton.room now controls everything. So let's zoom out so we can see that a bit better. So let's save this and then try an export. Save as number 9. Unhide our furniture nodes. Unhide the seating. So this is going to get, so let's go into shaded mode. So that is our room. Let's just save over the, and it's all controlled or parented to, in one way or another, skeleton.room. So it's controlled by that, everything. So all we need to do now is select everything, select all, shift click the dummies, and we have to do this twice. Once to make the dummy the active object so it highlights brighter orange, then click it again to deselect. Are those selected? And this is where it gets tricky, because we can click through our objects and select things that we don't actually want to. There we go. Then the room. Select skeleton.room. So that's our skeleton. Well, this top section. So what we can do now is export. So File, Export, FBX. Change your file location, change the file name if needed, that's okay. So selected objects, everything else is okay. Apply modifiers, yes, we want that. Armature, always disable add leaf bones. We don't need any animation, so disable or deactivate, and then click Export FBX. So let's see what this has done. So IMVU, derive new product, rooms and furniture, room. Click go. So this is the default. It's just a background with a seat node and a light. We're going to replace all of this. So FBX import, load FBX, browse to our file, Twitch Garage 9. So that brings in our skeleton and our room. So that's the mesh. So 57 bones, those are all the nodes. Each one of those is considered a bone and one mesh. So configure, small blocks. Oh, we did forget to do something. We have to properly rename the materials. So we need a numerical append, square brackets 0, close square brackets 1. So we can do this in the input box or double clicking the entry. 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a space between them, between the name, the label, and the square brackets, the opening square brackets, and this is 7. So we're using 7 materials. So save over that and then export again. So let's try something different this time. So select everything, skeleton.room, select that so it's the active object. So we're including the dummies in this, because if you've got a big room, obviously it's difficult to deselect the dummies. So select, export, FBX, same settings, selected objects, apply modifiers, disabled, disabled. Okay. Because what we can do is cancel that, reload the FBX, so it'll bring in all the meshes, including the helpers, so we can bring those in. But what we can do is just deselect them here. It just makes it easier. So we have our materials. That's okay. So we want 0. That's the mesh ID. Apply scale 0.01. Always disable rename root node, otherwise it'll mess up the room. And then we should be able to just import. Mesh is 8 times larger than IMVU. Material slot 1 and 2, so it's given us our warnings that things are going to be overridden, which is fine. Import changes, apply changes, and there is our room. It's brought in some of the textures, but not all of them, because we created some of these with internally generated images from Blender, and some externally created bitmaps. So it's brought in the bitmaps and used a placeholder for the other ones. But we have a functional room. A tiny, tiny garage. So what we could do, in fact, is, so we can do a bit of tweaking to this. So which is the first seat node? So it's this one. Let's see if we can hide some of this stuff so that we can make it easier. So hide the furniture nodes. We need the seating. So hide these. Okay. Oh, we need the camera. So, as mentioned earlier, the camera generally points at seat 01, but we've got seat 01 over here. So what we can do, so what number is that? That's seat 03. So let's rename these two. So we want this to be seat 01. Let's just call it seat 01B for now to make this clearer. So we then have to do the same thing to all the other bits. Seat 01, well, it's catcher 01B. Handle 1B. Picture 1B. And then rename seat 01 as seat 03. Picture 01 as picture 03. Handle 01, handle 03. Catcher 01, handle 03. So now we can rename this back to, whoops, 1, 1, 1, and 1. Whoops. 3, get rid of that append. So now this is the first seat node. So what we can do with the camera, so we can point it at the avatar's head. So that the target is roughly in line with the avatar's eyes. And because of the position of this, so what we can do here is just grab these 3. We don't need to do anything to capture and picture. Just rotate that to face the camera. So now the camera, so we're moving the camera as a unit, so we're selecting those 2 nodes and moving them together. So if you've got a very big room, you can change the distance between these, make it much wider or much larger. So they're not fixed like capture and picture. So let's get this. Whoops. Let's double check they are aligned. Whoops. Right between the eyes. And because everything is already linked, we don't need to redo that. So I'm just going to save another version of this, so so we have a reference 10. And then we can export that again. What else do we need to check? So we don't have to worry too much about the textures. Oh, let's double check the room. So what we want to do is check the lighting. So disable the ambient lighting, make it black, apply changes, and then we can see the position of our light, which is out here. So it's illuminating the character's back, but not the front. So we can use our ambient lighting. Let's try 100 to illuminate the inside of the room, but keeping the direction of our omni light useful. So we've positioned it out here so that we get this sense that there is light coming in directionally into the room. So if you go full bright, that's 255. So that's full bright because it's white. It washes everything out. And if you do that, there's no point in having a light in the room. So if you put a light in the room, if you include one, make sure to use the to drop the value of your ambient light. So let's go back to 100. So we still get a fairly bright room, but we have a lighting direction, or the impression of a directional light. So we don't have to do anything to that, so that's okay. Meshes, that's okay. We just need to replace some of these textures. We don't need any actions yet. We'll do that in the next stream. We'll try and create some custom poses for this. Assets, that shows us all the assets that are brought in. It's using 5 images, but it's brought in 7 materials, because for some of them, for 2 of them, it's using the inbuilt material replacement or placeholder. Right, so let's export the newer version or the updated version. So we save that, select all, make sure we have skeleton room dot thingamajiggery selected, export, FBX, this is number 10, same settings, selected objects, that's okay, geometry, apply modifiers, armature, that's okay, we don't need that, so export. So create a new project, rooms and furniture, rooms, okay, FBX import, load FBX, number 10, and again it's brought in the helpers because we can just deselect them. Yoink, get rid of those. Floor mesh 0 is the mesh ID. Apply scale 0.01 again. Disable rename room node. And that's okay, it's brought in our materials, so import. We'll get the same warnings, import changes, apply changes, and this time the camera is looking directly at the avatar. Let's change our room lighting. And that's okay. So that is bringing the room. It's using our skeleton, that's good. That's bringing our custom room into IMVU. So let's save this. Save as. Twitch room garage. Just brackets 10. Whoops. So in the next stream, what we might take a look at is some, oh, let's drop some furniture in actually. So hay bales. So we can drop some furniture in. And they all snap to the grid. So we'll put that on the wall. We can put it on the ceiling. Add some more hay bales. Because someone is playing farmer. Grain sacks. So someone's prepping. Whoops. So we can add furniture to the room. So that is our garage, small garage. So yes, on the next stream what we'll do is take a look at making a couple of custom poses for this. In the interim I'll sort out some textures so that we can replace these placeholders and maybe some actual textures just to replace everything that's on the mesh. So we can see a garage or something with semblance of a garage. But on the next stream, we'll take a look at making some custom poses. So we'll leave the default seat nodes in place. But what we can do, is add a couple of custom poses in addition to the defaults. But that is our custom room, small as it is, exported from Blender 2.8, exactly as we see it, into IMVU. So everything is exactly where it's placed in Blender, shows up in IMVU. And using nodes, that's these little square things, is so much easier than using skeletons as we used to use before, because the FBX file creates a skeleton or a hierarchy from the contents of the project, which makes it much, much easier to create rooms. So that is our project almost completed. All we need to do next is texture it, which I'll sort out in the interim as said, and we'll take a look at doing some custom poses. So that's about an hour and a half. Try and keep these streams relatively short, even though there's a lot of information to go through. So these aren't 5-minute button clicking things, tutorials. This is real time, the realities of creating rooms or items for IMVU. It can be a long, fiddly process, depending on what it is that you're making, but it's worth it, and it's worth taking the time to do things properly, air quotes again. It's worth taking time to do things properly so that you get the best out of the result. So we'll call it quits there, and we shall see you on the next stream. So bye for now.